Now, brethren, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him, we ask you not to be soon shaken in mind or troubled, either by spirit or by word or by letter, as if from us, as though the day of Christ had come. Let no one deceive you by any means. For that day will not come unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Do you not remember that when I was still with you, I told you these things? The coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan with all power, signs, and lying wonders.
The first thing we need to be aware of is that Paul is continuing his teaching from the first chapter. And as I've been saying before, this thing with chapter divisions, sometimes they get in the way, actually, because I think most times when people share from 2 Thessalonians about the second coming of Christ, they begin at the first verse in chapter 2. But actually the teaching of Paul begins in chapter 1, as we were looking at last time. And we have to have that as the basis, the background for what Paul is saying here in chapter 2. And we saw last time that just before Jesus is revealed from heaven with his mighty angels, the church will be troubled. It will be persecuted and in tribulation. That is what Paul says in chapter 1. And then he says, now concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him. Now he connects here the gathering together to him, to the Lord, at his coming. And of course he's referring, as I said, to what he said in chapter 1, but he's also referring to what he said in his first letter to the Thessalonians in chapter 4, where he talks about the Lord coming and we're being gathered in the air, in the clouds, to meet him when he comes. And that's what he's talking about here. Concerning this coming, the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. Now, Paul has something to say to the church. Now, if we look at this passage in bits and pieces, we might not get the picture. We have actually to do a little bit of detective work here. We've got to make observations and we've got to make deductions. That's how we look at what Paul is saying. We can't look at bits and pieces, but we've got to look at the whole picture. If we look at the second verse, it looks as if a letter had been written to the church in Thessalonica, a forged letter, forged in Paul's name, saying that the day of Christ or the day of the Lord is at hand or has come. So this worried the church. They were put on edge here. And the false teaching that are coming to the church, this is something that Paul is addressing now. He's combating this teaching that has come into the church. Now, the false teaching said the day of Christ or the day of the Lord had come or is here or has come or is present. That's the idea that's portrayed here. And you can also say that it's in a way overhanging. It's imminent. It's in the process of happening. That was the false teaching. Now, if we look at the teaching of Jesus, we see that Jesus warned against people who would say this. In Luke 21, he says there, do not be deceived. Don't let anyone deceive you, because many will come and say the time has drawn near, referring to his coming. And then Jesus says, don't go after them. So that's what's happening here. People are saying the time has drawn near. Now Jesus is going to come now. And Paul says, hang on a minute, this is not the way it is. And then he says, let no one deceive you, because he says there are specifically two things that must happen before Jesus comes and gathers us to himself, he says here. The first thing that Paul says is going to happen is what he calls the falling away. Now, what did Paul mean by the falling away? Well, the Greek word there is apostasia, and it occurs here, of course, and it occurs one more place in the New Testament, and that is in Acts 21, verse 21. That's easy to remember, 21:21. And there Paul was accused, actually, of teaching the Jews who lived among the Gentiles. He was accused of teaching them apostasia from Moses. And so we see that this apostasia is a departure from a teaching, a departing from a doctrine. He was accused, falsely accused, of making the Jews depart from the teaching of Moses. That they should depart from Moses, they should leave Moses, they should rebel against Moses. And that's why this word in many English translations is translated rebellion. So we see here that it's talking about a spiritual departure, not a physical departure, but a spiritual departure from the faith. And if we go to Jesus, I think Paul is actually referring to Jesus here in the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24, because Jesus explained in Matthew 24 that in the end time, he says, many shall fall away. That's what Jesus said. And he told two reasons for that. That was because of false teaching and persecution. He said, many shall fall away. So I think Paul is just referring to what Jesus says in his discourse. And even Paul, he says in 1 Timothy chapter 4, he says that the Spirit says in expressly that in the latter times some will depart from the faith. So Paul says it again in a more clearer way in that passage. So that was one thing that needs to happen, because Jesus had taught this. And the other thing, Paul says, will happen before Jesus comes and gathers us, is the appearance or the revelation of the man of sin, the son of perdition. Now, who's this man? If we go to 1 John chapter 2, he's called by another title there, and that is the Antichrist. Most people say the Antichrist, but Paul, he refers to him as the man of sin, the son of perdition. Now he tells actually what this man is going to do, so he will be recognized. We will know when this revelation of the man of sin is going to take place. And he's actually referring to Jesus in Matthew 24. I haven't got time to go into the details there, but actually he's doing that. He says that this man is going to sit in the temple of God and show himself, and by doing that, show himself that he is God. Now, if we take this phrase, the temple of God, in Greek, you'll see that this exact same phrase is found in Matthew 26. And there it talks about the temple in Jerusalem. And if you take this exact same phrase in Greek, the temple of God, you will also find it in the book of Revelation in chapter 11, where it talks about the temple of God in the holy city, Jerusalem, in the end time. So I come to the conclusion that this is talking about a physical temple of God. And if we see this in the light of the prophecies of Daniel, you see that as Jesus referred to Daniel in Matthew 24, he says that specifically, Paul is also referring to Daniel, because we see that what the Antichrist will do in the temple of God, or else it's called the sanctuary in Daniel's prophecy. We see that the Antichrist will set up an abomination of desolation in the temple. And it says this in Daniel 8 and Daniel 9 and 11 and also in chapter 12. So it's a very central event. So in another way we see that Paul is referring to Daniel is that Paul says that the Antichrist, or the son of perdition, he will exalt himself above all that is called God. Now, Paul is actually almost quoting from Daniel 11 and Daniel 8 about the Antichrist. It's as if he takes those words from the prophets without saying as it is written. So he's referring again to Daniel's prophecies. And he also says in verse 9 that the coming of the lawless one will be according to the working of Satan with all power, signs and lying wonders. And we can read about this in the book of Revelation in chapter 13, where the appearance of the Antichrist there, or the beast as he's called there, is associated with lying signs and wonders and to deceive people. So Paul, he gives us indicators of how he is to be recognized in the end time.